Hi, this is Danny, hope you're doing good. And in this video, we're going to take a look at the single Release. This is currently number 4 in the Traxsource Top 100 for Garage, and it's been supported by DJs like Jeremy Sylvester, Mark Cottrell, and many more. So we're going to take a look at the composition, we're going to take a look at the instruments that I used, and also I'll explain some of the thinking behind the structure and the arrangement. Now this is a super hype and energetic track. There's a lot going on, and what I'll do is I'll break it down into different sections. We'll start off with the chords, and I'm going to explain a process that I used. Let's solo these first. So there are multiple elements that combine together. They start off being filtered. You can see this is a low pass filter. Automation is opening up the frequencies, making them sound brighter over time. But you can see that there are 3 elements underneath that are being grouped. So we have a brass synth, an organ, and a piano. Now what they're doing is essentially playing the same chords but at different positions. And what I'm going to do, let me just take this past the point when the filter is opening up. Let's take a look at this. I'm going to zoom in. Now look how these are staggered. So you can see in a way that this almost becomes like a call and response, even though they're the same chords. And one of these is sustained and overlaps, whereas this one completely stops. Let me zoom in even further. Now I'll explain what I did. I had these chords on one track initially. I generated them, and then I split them down onto separate tracks with separate instruments. I then moved each chord down to its own track. And that's what created this essence of a rhythmic version of the original chords. You can see that, right? So literally one track to start off with, same chords, but then mapped down onto 2 additional instruments and split. There's another element that comes in to back up this. So I'm going to turn this on now. And I'll show you the individual instruments as well. So the brass, called Triton. This is a patch I've used a lot, the MMG brass. In fact, why don't I just solo these so you can hear them properly, right? Brass on its own. Then the organ. A real classic, kind of 90s sounding organ patch. That's a new jazz organ on the Korg Triton Extreme. Then we have a piano. Once again, Korg Triton, BD Grand Concert. Very short and percussive. These are contrasting sounds, right? So they all manage to sit together, having their own place, their own energy. And then this organ bass over here. And this is complementing the others. This is the instrument itself. When I say bass, I've rolled off the bass, funnily enough, the new jazz organ one. And I'm using that just to add some extra notes in a way into those chords. So that's that. The bass is essentially 2 elements together. There is a low bass and then an organ bass. Okay, so let's just listen to these. The equivalent on the organ, which is a real classic old sound, right? It's almost super cliched, but it felt like it worked. So here the bass line is coming from the Halion 7, and you know that I've been excited about using this one. I don't know what's happened here. I have no idea. I'm not going to get into the details here and try and fix this, but for some reason right now it's not showing. Okay, so I think I've got some library issues, but that's still working. You can still hear it, and it's great. It's I featured it on a previous video. It's a fantastic version of the old classic FM bass. And then now this organ bass is absolutely the cliched, the one and only organ 2 from the Korg M1. So the 2 of these together work like this. And they're very much a hook in a way. You know, you've got musical hooks, there's a bass line hook here, and they're working nicely. Very, very energetic. So there's something also that I want to point out here. I had an argument with myself over this. It was the usage of this sound. I'll play it for you. And what I wanted was some kind of rhythmic, energetic sound, a texture almost that was a juxtaposition to the existing musical elements. And I had to render this as audio. I had to freeze it. And that's because what it was the movements of the sound, the LFOs and stuff that were used in the original preset meant that every time I listened to the track from the very beginning, it changed. So they weren't tempo synced. So I had to render it at a point at which I liked it. And so that's what you're hearing there. But if you want to know what the instrument is, I'm going to unfreeze this. And this is the Pigments from Arturia. I do actually love this synthesizer. For more eccentric sounds and more interesting sounds, kind of less of the traditional 90s kind of sounds, this is perfect for it. So it's a patch called Dance on Sunrise. And I love what it brings to the table. It's got a real difference to it. Whereas the rest of it could sound quite cliched, this at least brings something new to the table. So let's take a look. So we've got to break down, we've got to build up with the filter and everything. Kind of cliched, but it works. Then it moves into a new section. There's a vocal being triggered. And that really is a very strong hook. I cut up the vocal and placed it on different parts of a drum rack. And now we've got the string, and this is running through the auto filter in different ways. If you want to know what the preset is, I'll bring that up. It's called Triton again. It's called Classical Music. And what happens is, as you can see, it's used as a kind of like an alternating version of the same chords, whereas before we had this split across these three instruments. Now we're using one instrument. And then also afterwards, for some variety, I use the filter. And what I do is I manually bring this down using the automation, so that provides a rhythmic kind of pulse with the filter. You hear that now. And that brings a fantastic new energy to an element that we've already heard. So it's deliberately changed. Now you can hear a high string in the background to create some tension. That's something I do a lot, and it's great because you can create tension and then remove it. It's a very important trick to use in your compositions. This high string is, let's remind myself what it was, another Korg Triton. You can see that that's been used very heavily in this particular composition. Back onto the vocal hook. And let me just move some of these out of the way so we can take a look at this. Let's just take a look at that. I mean, look, this is a trick for creating a sense of sustained tension and building up to something happening. What I did was I took one of those chord sections and just repeated them. So I didn't have the full resolution of the chord progression. Instead, I repeated it and created a loop. Did the same with the vocal here and allowed that to build up. Created a pause with the vocal and then came back kicking in. So let's have a look at that again. Let me just minimize the vertical height of these. I've also got something that I've used many times, which has become almost a cliche for me, and that's using a clap on the last beat with a big set of delays. And this one you can see here. So the clap is a sample coming from the Wave Alchemy Drumvolution library, which I love. And then the delay here is a very quick delay. So it's a 16th, very rapid. Let me solo that for you. It's not too loud in the mix, but it creates a really dynamic, vibrant energy at those points. So this track's pretty rolling, it's almost relentless actually. It keeps going and there's nothing radically new that comes in, but it does do another breakdown coming up. And that's after a couple of kind of DJ style edits where I chop the beats for a couple of beats and then bring them back, and you'll hear that coming up. But that's a nice technique just to get a little bit more mileage out of the existing elements. And what's interesting, it actually gives a lot more space to that arpeggiated sound again. So in that break, you really hear it on its own. It has a sense of space because the beats are gone. Now, of course, it's got beats. I'll open these up. You can take a look. So the drum programming, this was a drum rack, individually selected sounds, layered with a separate snare track. This is a weird thing that I do sometimes. I do my main beat in the drum rack, but then do isolated sampler instruments for additional hits here and there. There is also a ride cymbal. And you can see here that I've stripped the beats back, taking away the kind of the hi-hats and the clap and so on, just keeping it down to the kick. And there's a rising kind of pitch coming from Serum. This is certainly nothing groundbreaking, but what it does is it has an immense energy. And that's why I call it release. It's not about the track being a release as in a recordings release. It feels like it's a release of energy. There's an optimistic but also slightly twisted, darker aspect to it musically. So it's both happy and sad to me. But that's the kind of stuff that I look for in music that I listen to be honest. So now look, very, very cliched. Let's just start reducing those elements down as time goes on, because we know that if this is being played by a DJ, they're going to be blending the new track in fairly soon. And I've heard some fantastic mix sessions online where DJs have really used this to great effect. So let's just move on a bit to the final aspects. Everybody's asking about this. So I am using the BX SSL on most of the channels, and I'm doing that to get some analog style summing. So that's why I've got it over here on the master. So this is being used to essentially aggregate the signal from all of those different channels, but give some kind of personality to it, like a real old school desk. I did start off by having the soft tube tape, but I decided to take that off. And then what I did for the mastering was I used the Ozone 10, which I do actually think is fantastic. And I can't actually remember what I did here. Sometimes I do the auto learn. Sometimes I reference another track. I can't remember what I did, but it's not compressed too heavily, not limited too heavily. It certainly has a great sound, and I've heard it on a variety of different systems and heard by different DJs. It sounds fantastic. So that's what I used there. So that's it pretty much. If anybody has any questions, I'll do my best to respond. But in the meantime, please support the release. It's called Release, and it's something that there is also a classical version. I did a video about it. I took those chords that I've just taken you through here, and I turned it into a classical composition. So if you like the musical vibe of what you're hearing, you want to hear it in a different perspective, please go and check out that video as well. Okay, thanks everybody, and have a great weekend, and I will see you soon.